Hello and welcome to the April 2026 episode of the Alice in Supply Chains podcast. Every month, this podcast covers the latest news concerning third-party security posture management and digital supply chain risk. We pick a few of the industry's most interesting stories and discuss them. This podcast accompanies the very popular Alice in Supply Chains newsletter, which covers a lot more ground than we can in the 30 or 40 minutes that we do here, sometimes 50 minutes. If you like what you hear in this podcast, you can join 15,682 other subscribers as of last night when I checked that, and read the Alice in Supply Chains newsletter every month. To subscribe, you can go to tenchisecurity.com, click on Insights and News, and then Alice in Supply Chains newsletter. Also, if you're listening to this, why not subscribe? You're already there. The button's right there. Just click it. We'd also love to hear your feedback. Leave us a comment. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know if there's anything else you'd like us to cover. If we're missing any really interesting stories out there, it's entirely possible. Let us know. All right, let's get this show started. Welcome again, Alexandre. This is the second podcast that we record today. We're doubling up. So it's familiar faces, familiar.
Long time no see. Like we recorded another podcast episode, basically just before this one. We have a special episode coming up with the very famous John Hammond to discuss software supply chain attacks. I'm still angry that the software supply chain community stole the supply chain term from us, like much like crypto did for cryptography. Right. But still, very interesting discussion. We're not sure when we're recording this what the order will be in which they are published, but keep your eyes open for that episode. It was awesome.
Yep. I'm looking forward to editing it, maybe pulling out some interesting short videos from it. That's always a fun part of the process for me. So I am your host, Adrian and Alexandre, founder of the Defenders Initiative. And let's get going on today's, kicking off with the vibes here. I joke, I haven't made a podcast that hasn't mentioned AI since ChatGPT came out. I'm looking forward to the day when I can say we're not mentioning it every show now, but that's not going to be today. That's not going to be this show. So the vibes I chose for today, I use Claude Code for the first time on my MacBook Neo, no less. I got one of these $600 MacBook Neos. I actually went with a $700 one with the Touch ID and twice as much storage, but I'm finding it surprisingly capable. With 8 gigs of RAM, I think I've hit the limit once, but what I was doing was just ridiculous for an entry-level laptop. So pretty impressed with it.
I almost bought one at RSA. I decided to instead buy a MacBook Air for my wife because I was exactly concerned about the 8 gigs, and I've been hearing a lot of feedback. A lot of people I know, including you, are very impressed with it, and maybe the next time because it's much cheaper and has a much longer battery life. So absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned Claude Code, right? We are doing, I think I've mentioned a few times in the past podcast, a lot of work with AI here at Tenchi as well. Being very careful to make sure we're using it in a way that it's actually working, it's actually effective, but not just efficient. And we have a beta of our MCP server. And I got to demo it for a couple of customers. We had a customer advisory board session yesterday.
Nice.
Here in Brazil with some of the CISOs of the top banks and telcos. And it was pretty interesting. So there's some really cool stuff you can do with it.
Yeah. I just feel so behind. I have not played with MCP yet. I'm just now playing with Claude Code. I chose the week that Claude had some downtime, I think, maybe. There were some issues with Claude earlier this week. I was thinking, am I just using this thing wrong? And then I noticed other people are having problems too. So, it lived up to the reputation. It took me way too long to get what I wanted to get done, but I learned a lot in the process. And I talked to a bunch of people and learned I just need to prompt differently. So I think I have a lot to learn about prompting correctly or in the most efficient way with it.
I wish you the best of luck on your endeavors. There is absolutely some value to take out of this. From my vibe, so besides the two major things are the reason why we're recording the two episodes in the same day is because my calendar is super compressed. Because next week there will be the TPRA, the Third Party Risk Association conference in Denver, and my co-founder and I are going to be there. We're sponsoring this edition. We're kind of getting closer to the association. And so if anyone that's hearing this podcast plans to attend, go check us out at booth 9. We'll be more than happy to chat all things TPRM. And also, I had an insight that's unrelated to the news stories we're going to cover on the CAB session yesterday that I wanted to share, which we talk so much about the assessment techniques, the technologies you can use to assess the security of your third parties and questionnaires and SOC 2s and all those things in TPRM. And I think one of the most interesting success ideas or criteria for a TPRM program came about that I didn't even think about was one of the banks, and it was Chatham House rules, but one of the banks in the CAB mentioned that they were successful in making sure that whenever a new project was approved at the bank, and they had to do through like cost benefit analysis of that project, they had to include all of the security and compliance costs associated with that. So for example, if you're adding new technology, you have to factor in to see if the ROI of the project is sound, not only the cost of hiring a vendor, but also the cost for doing TPCRM on that vendor or TPRM in general on that vendor.
The overhead.
Right. All of the overhead associated with whatever infrastructure we're bringing in or vendors, like the legal costs of negotiating the contract, everything. And that means that security doesn't have to defend the entire budget for TPRM. Like the budgets of the business teams that are doing things that require vendors are paying that bill. And so security doesn't have a huge OPEX that they now have to justify every time. That is just seen as a stupid overhead, depending on how your management structure is. And all of the other CISOs were like dumbfounded, saying that's even possible, right? Because that's a major blocker for being able to invest properly in the discipline. So I'm just sharing it here more broadly. It's something I'm going to try to make into a study because I felt it was such a great idea. But of course, it's an uphill battle, try to change how your company like does financial approvals of projects. But I'm just saying, it hadn't even occurred to me. So I felt it was super enlightening.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so jumping into story number 1 here. This is interesting. This kind of came out of, I mean, this is something we've probably already talked on the podcast before now. But the question of, are your third parties using AI, and what is your risk exposure to them using AI? And this one is there's a bit of a Streisand effect here, where Amazon had some downtime and really looked to be related to their employees using AI, because Amazon is one of these companies that requires their employees to use AI. Like you have to use it a certain amount. You have to justify your continued employment by using the AI. And they have their own internal one. I forget the name of it that they use. And then they have the one that they sell, which is Amazon Q. And there were like 2 or 3 cases where an engineer plus AI equaled disaster. Maybe disaster is a little overstating it, but certainly got people thinking. Is this smart? Like forcing people to use AI? Particularly engineers. When we still don't know the edges, we still don't know exactly how to put guardrails on things. And Amazon said, no, this mistake could have been made with a bunch of other tools other than AI, but it didn't. It was AI. and their fix for it was to put more humans in the loop. So now, changes have to be reviewed by humans, which I think kind of misses the whole point of AI being a force multiplier in the first place, like inserting intentional bottlenecks like this. But I think it certainly has other organizations thinking, how would I even know if my third parties are using AI, and all of a sudden, the risk I might associate them went from a low to a high or something like that. something like that, depending on how much they're using it and how much access they're giving it, how much data they're letting it control. So yeah, just interested in your thoughts on, like, is this something you contractually handle? You handle through a contract? Like, is some of this exposed in some way that you can consume and go over? You know, like, how are you thinking about it at Tenchi? Like, is this something that you can surface in your own product?
So I can tell you what I'm seeing customers doing about it. I go through third-party audits myself because I'm a vendor to large enterprises, and I talk to them about their TPRM programs, and again, I can tell you what the stuff we're doing here on the product. I just want to start by saying that the thing you said about this is besides the point. I don't think it is. Again, I think AI can very definitely be an augmentation to humans. So for example, if you are a developer, if you're a guy in DevOps, you can ask AI to help you create a script. Then that should then review and test and ensure it functions properly. And then you unleash it on production. Or some people, that's a hypothesis. People think that maybe under certain circumstances or someday you can just give AI an instruction, and you gave AI direct access to production and let AI do its thing. This second thing, maybe if you're a tiny startup dealing in a non-regulated environment with non-critical functions or data, maybe. If you are AWS with a huge customer base, under a lot of obligations to meet SLAs, and working with very regulated customers, not the best idea. And they decided to do it anyways, and they had to learn the hard way that it was not the best idea. They could have asked me or anyone with common sense before they did that. But the mandate to say we are AI first and AI centric seems to be trumping common sense and common engineering and like sound engineering practices more and more. We need to pull people back down to reality. There is value in this technology, but it is not magic. And depending on who you are, you need to have proper care when you're implementing any new technology, and AI is not different. I just want to stop there because that comment of yours kind of triggered me a little. I mean, I know you did it on purpose, but I wanted to put that point across before I talk about the TPRM. I'll let you comment on this.
Well, you know, I think it's possible the common sense might have gotten caught up in the layoffs, and that's where the common sense went. Is it like where do we cut? Like these people are always telling us where, you know, to do testing and extra things. It's really annoying. Let's lay off those folks.
Yes, yeah, that's something that might have happened.
They're slowing things down.
Going back to the how can you handle that from a TPRM process, right? So the first thing is that I'm seeing every company doing is they're trying to find out if you are using AI and which AI are you using, right? Kind of exploratory, open-ended question, like which models are you using, and what are the use cases, what data do those models have access to? So it's not so much, hey, I know exactly what the guardrails or controls should be, and I'm testing you to see if you have the controls. It's much more like, what is even happening here? Because I don't think we've reached a consensus on what the minimum level of requirements would be. Like, everyone knows what the minimum level of requirements is for endpoint security, for IAM, or for wherever else. Not so much with AI. So it's very exploratory. And it was very much up to the analyst, the TPRM analyst, to say, do I need to probe further or not, right? And the kind of concern I'm seeing is like, are people using DeepSeek or AI models that are based in regions of the world that shouldn't even be doing business with? Like, for example, for most of the Western world, like sending your data to a Chinese SaaS provider, like maybe not the best idea, depending on who you are and what you do. So that sort of thing is the main concern. And I see very little detailed information about this, but it's typically today being handled as follow-up meetings where you kind of have like an architectural discussion, right? And the one thing that so there are a few things. I went to the AWS CISO circle during RSA, and one of the things they did is they have like an agentic AI and a generative AI security scoping guide that I found was super interesting, that where they kind of give you 5 or 4 stages depending if it's the generative AI or the agentic AI matrix, to tell you a little bit about how deep you are using the product with. So you have, for example, no agency, like the agent is human initiated, and it does not have the ability to directly change anything. Then you have prescribed agency where the human initiates it, but the human has to approve every change. That's what they fell back to on AWS, that level, prescribed agency. You have supervised agency where it's human initiated, but the agentic AI does take actions autonomously and there's no human in the loop approving it. And then you have scope 4, which is full agency, which is it starts automatically, it does its own thing, no humans are involved, it's just there, like doing its thing. If you are doing anything above scope 2, like prescribed agency today, you better damn well be sure you tested the hell out of this thing. You know you have narrowed down the scope and you narrow down the things that this thing can do, and you can investigate it after the fact, or you have guardrails in place to make sure it doesn't screw things up. Otherwise, you're going to end up learning the same way Amazon did, right? That's my feeling today, right? So that's a good way to think about this, and we might need to find a public version of this to share a link for the folks listening to the podcast, because I feel this is super, it was very well put together, and I really like this.
I'll see if I can find it and get it up on the screen so folks can see what scope 2 means.
I'll tell you what I haven't seen, right? So around this, there's not a lot of discussion yet, at least not on the questionnaires, on the assessments, on the initial wave of TPRM, any discussion about individual guardrails being enabled. Here at Tenchi, we have started on the platforms that we do have security tests for. We are already testing the settings of the AI model. So for example, when you scan AWS accounts, if we see that people are using Bedrock, right, or Agent Core, we're checking that the input and output guardrails have been set up, that they're trying to filter or control what the output is, because those are settings you can set when you create a model. When you create an agent, you can set those configurations. We're checking for this. If you're using a GitHub Copilot, have you enabled the check saying don't train based on my code, or don't generate code that meets exact inputs, so I'm not violating anyone else's PII or intellectual property or things like that. And so we're doing
AI
that for
model posture management. We now have a new category.
Exactly. And fun fact, we still don't have a way to connect directly to Anthropic APIs or OpenAPI APIs or the major ones. Do you know why? Their APIs are so rudimentary that they do not allow me to check how things are configured without having full-on God mode, and thus access to data I don't want to access. So those companies could maybe spend a couple of $1 million adding proper, authorization control on their APIs. Pretty please. I mean, you have the money and the engineers to do it. Can you please focus on that?
So now you need the customer to create some kind of compliance agent that fetches the data for you and presents it to you in some way. Now you have to use AI to build an extra component to be able to do that.
We're experimenting with ways to try to get that information, but yeah, it's a problem, like the lack of maturity security wise of those APIs. Like they don't have proper RBAC, right? Which all the other tools do. The other thing that I find very rarely addressed is the privacy and safety concerns around AI usage by the third parties. So if your third party is using AI, how well are they handling abuse cases, right? They're not security related, and are they feeding PII to the models? And finally, here's one concern that I think is really not being thought about. Because it's not typically under the remit of TPRM, even though you do have financial controls on TPRM, right? Like, is this company financially sound? Especially if you're working with an AI-centric, smaller startup. We know that if a company is heavily using tokens, and the cost of tokens are heavily subsidized right now, does this limit the future viability of that startup? Or does it mean that in a couple of years they might have to hike up prices because the price of tokens have hiked up a little bit? So I would be asking questions on the financial side of things for very AI-centric, AI-heavy, AI-first tooling. what percentage of your cost is related to tokens, and what would happen if the cost of tokens doubled? Would that company still be viable, right?
Yeah, I saw a really interesting post on that where apparently, like a lot of your token cost in some of these applications comes from the context window size, and it's not the initial prompt; it's each subsequent prompt. Because by default, it sends the original question and all subsequent questions and answers into each new prompt. So, like what costs you a penny, then costs you 10 cents, then costs you $1. Like it just snowballs. There's this natural snowball effect. And I saw this was somebody on LinkedIn just kind of like walking through the whole story of how they reduced their AI token costs by like 89%. With no impact to the quality of the responses, just because they were sending too much to the model in every one of those subsequent chats throughout a chat session. So I thought that was really interesting. And the other thing that struck me was in Mythos, they do mention money, even though we don't know how much the model costs. We don't know the inference cost compute wise or dollar wise for the model. But they do mention something cost them just shy of $20,000. And I don't know what to do with that information. I don't know if that's what they would charge a customer, almost $20,000 for what they did, or if their actual costs are maybe $100, or if their cost is $40,000, right? I don't know what to do with that information because I don't know how much that's being subsidized, and they didn't say if this was the customer cost or like their actual inference on bare metal for whatever they I'm not even clear on whether they're running their own stuff in their own data centers or if they're using some of these hyperscalers, neoscalers, whatever we're calling them. There's just so many unknowns here, and we're not going to know. I think 2027 some of the debt comes due, that they have to start paying down on. So they're going to have to be at a certain revenue rate, or else figure out some financial tricks. So maybe another year as people kind of dig a hole into token burn before we find out. And we've already seen some price jumps, right? Like not just in the cost, the individual cost of the tokens, and the cost of the models, but we've also seen a price jump like as these things get smarter, which really just means that they ask more questions and they burn more tokens, as you get into the agentic stuff. That they're just in general for the same question you would have asked a year ago, they're going to burn more tokens now.
Exactly. So this is, again, something we mentioned on the last episode, right? This is harder to control. It is secure. This is harder. This is more unpredictable. This is less explainable. This is potentially more expensive, or at least there's a huge risk of cost increase that made something that was viable before not viable in the short term, again, or in the medium term. So I would really advise people, again, this is worth investigating, but make sure that whatever benefit you're getting out of this more than compensates for those risks, that you're taking all of those risks into account and the costs associated with securing it, with doing whatever it takes to do it well, in order to make sense. Because, for example, you're mentioning the $20,000 costs, right, on the Mythos paper. They're talking about the token costs of finding that BSD vulnerability, right? Mm-hmm. But they had like a really well-known
open BSD. There were two BSD vulnerabilities. One was free BSD, one was open. So I like specifying which.
Oh no! I've just started a religious war.
Well, no, it's because one was remote code execution and the other just crashed the OS. So I think it's worth mentioning that the one that just crashes the OS, that's lower value, that one was 20,000.
And I learned on your interesting article on the subject, which you should link to on the show notes, by the way, is that there was a very experienced security vulnerability researcher guiding this thing, providing over 44 prompts. So we don't know if that token cost is their own internal token cost or if that reflects the token cost that would be offered to customers. Right. Because again, I hear Mythos is going to cost 5 times as much per token as the previous generation of model. I just heard that today.
Yeah,
But
Opus is
have they
already one of the most expensive ones out there.
exactly? So have they taken into account the man-hour cost of that leading expert on vulnerability research that was necessary to guide the model into finding the right comment, or they continue with the pretense that this is going to replace humans? Because again, I don't think those things work anywhere near well. If they're by themselves, they need to have a human guiding it, or at least criticizing their work. We're doing a ton of stuff with AI here at Tenchi, and we're being careful. For example, those things can suggest, they can review PRs, but the developers have to look at those reviews and say, this is right, this is wrong, I'm going to fix this, I'm not going to fix that because it doesn't make sense. Or we generate some initial code. We then have to have tests run on them and make sure both automated tests and then QA apply to it before that code that it wrote sees the light of day. It's not going straight to production. That would be crazy, right? We're working with regulated companies. It's still giving us a tremendous performance boost. So this is not a robot that replaces a person. This is kind of a better tool, is the best way of looking at it. And it may become more than that in time, but that's a hypothesis, not a certainty, like a lot of people are saying.
Yeah, and one of the suggestions, the Cloud Security Alliance put out a guide on how to Mythos proof your environment, or how to prepare your environment for Mythos, and some of it's really good. So it's kind of by committee. Like there's like 80 different people listed on this thing, and some of it I think is good advice, and some of it I disagree with almost entirely, because like the number one piece of advice they give you is take AI and point it at your code base, and just start ripping through your code base with AI. And like in this case, for this one OpenBSD bug, they're saying it cost, well, for the free BSD one, we don't know what that one cost, but let's assume it was something similar. It was also $10,000-$20,000 in tokens, but it was also 8 hours of a vulnerability expert's time. Which if we assume they're making 300,000 US dollars a year, that's like $1,200. And that's one bug. That was for one bug, for both finding the vulnerability and producing a working exploit for it. So, and most of the bugs it's finding are just crashes, or things that are not high value anyway. So I kind of, well, especially if teams are still missing a lot of the foundational security work that you should be doing, around protecting your code and securing your code and your CI/CD pipeline, all the stuff we talked about in our conversation with John Hammond. I don't know that you should prioritize taking an AI model and just vuln cannon at your code base.
And I'm so we've known that the problem is not in finding bugs so much, is in remediating them for decades. Again, as your article very clearly puts it. Unless you show me side-by-side comparisons on real code bases done by independent people, not by the marketing team at Anthropic, right? Showing that this is either finding very different bugs at a decent cost, or the same bugs cheaper than, say, SemGrep or Veracode or the existing tooling that we already have on the same code basis, I wouldn't throw this at it, because let's be honest, there are tools that are much easier to use, or much more cost effective, and tools that the companies probably already own now, right? That are generating bugs, and we can't handle them. So unless someone tells me, no, this is better bang for the buck, right? This is finding different bugs, so it's complementary, or this is finding the same bugs but with less false positives at the same cost or a lower cost, I'm withholding judgment to see if this is actually better. Again, I don't care if it's done with AI or, pixie dust or whatever it is, unicorn poop. I don't care. Is it better for its intended purpose? And that's the thing we're missing, because that information hasn't been released. There has been no actual, cost benefit comparison. So again, that's what I think people should be expecting to do before they decide this is worth investigating.
So the information that has been released is a comparison against other AI models. So we've seen, it's not Anchor, it's, I keep forgetting the name of this company. It starts with an A. Attic? No, that's not right. I'll find it, but I'll put it up on the screen. But
Arbor?
huh?
Arbor, is it?
No,
No.
it's not Arbor. But so they're doing some similar stuff to. There's Khalif. There's this company. They're all kind of like Google Project Zero. Like they're using AI to go look for bugs, and they took older models and much more basic models. They took one with I think 3.1 billion parameters, which is like an order of magnitude, or like 3 orders of magnitude smaller than something like a Mythos, which is up in the trillions of parameters. And they found the same bugs, right? Like they proved they were able to find the same stuff as the mythical Mythos. That's 5 times more expensive than an expensive model. But they didn't even compare it against an expensive model. They compared it against a cheap model. So we've seen a AI to AI comparison, and already it's saying you don't need to spend that money to find these bugs.
Precisely. Who knew that the marketing team of a vendor pushing a technology would exaggerate or frame the output in a way that makes it look awesome? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It just, yeah. And that went in my blog post as well. Is like, first of all, it's just madness to take them at their word and not put their claims to the test.
I'm
Right.
hoping it's good. I'm hoping it's great. As a security professional, I want this to find a lot of bugs cheaply. And there's the potential as well with AI to help like build the PRs, like Dependabot does for forever now, but try to help at least an initial version. Like again, make the developers more productive in developing the fixes for the problems, which actually is where I think people should be spending more time because that's where the bottleneck is today, right? But the problem is one of accessibility and cost. We either have companies that don't even have the money to buy vulnerability scanners, so coming up with a more expensive one does not solve the problem, or making the fixes more cheaper, because what happens is either companies don't have the manpower to fix them all, or they are so expensive that the opportunity cost of stopping developing new features that could generate more revenue is not justified, to fix a bug, because probably the vast minority of vulnerabilities that companies find are ever exploited, right?
Right.
So that's
Right.
one of the problems that those are the levers we needed to really move here if we want to help the vulnerability issue.
Yeah. Yeah. The name I was looking for, by the way, was aisle, as in like aisle on a plane or aisle in a grocery store. It's spelled the same way as that. All right. We'll take a quick ad break here and be right back with story number 2. This episode is brought to you by Exemption, the innovative SaaS solution for third-party cyber risk management that's disrupting the market with a cooperative, continuous, and comprehensive approach. Exemption is the only solution that combines outside-in with inside-out visibility through authorized, non-intrusive read-only checks, so you can validate security posture beyond what's visible from the internet. Get an A to F security score refreshed every 6 hours based on the severity, how long issues stay open, and whether findings recur or spread across assets. Visit tenchisecurity.com to schedule a demo. So story number 2, the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission in the U.S., has banned the sale of non-U.S. routers, which everyone kind of collectively rolled their eyes at, because we've heard the story before. We've been down this road before with a bunch of Chinese manufacturers, ZTE, Huawei. TikTok was threatened to be banned for years and never got banned, and we did ban Huawei, but then the money ran out to help telcos rip and replace the Huawei gear. So I assume we still have Huawei gear here in the US. So, just to frame this thing, like it's never been, it's about power dynamics, right? And trade. It's never been about security. It's never been about preventing spying or anything like that, because Salt Typhoon did that without using any backdoors in Chinese gear, because the US telecoms just had the front doors open.
And
allegedly. We haven't seen the report because they laid off the people who were going to write the report.
yes. So I, again, this is solving a problem that is, as far as I know, mostly theoretical. As you said, we haven't seen like widespread exploitation associated with backdoors on those devices, right? And when we have, it was more like criminals, for example, pre-infecting like Android TV set-top boxes or mobile phones, like before they were distributed to customers. It was not the manufacturers themselves necessarily doing the thing. It was criminals doing that after the fact, as far as I can tell. So this is solving a problem that doesn't exist. And even if the problem did exist, right, in any meaningful size, you're doing it wrong, right? Because the right answer is if people are being, so first of all, if you said, hey, we have enemy countries, or we have countries that where like the criminals are running amok, or you could block and sanction individual companies that are known to have problems. You could even block individual countries that you know to have. Like, we're in an adversarial relationship with China, so we're going to block China in Russia or in Iran or whoever else. But just saying anyone that's not American, yes, you said it's a very thinly veiled economic measure. It's, about making sure things are produced in your own country and like impacting the balance of payments, etc. Which at the end of the day, to be frank, means American consumers are going to have fewer choices. They're going to pay more for possibly lower quality equipment because there will be less competition. If they wanted to increase security, they need to set um, like minimum security controls or minimum security measures that those devices need to abide by to be able to be sold in the US. And then no matter where you are in the world, if you produce devices that have that level of security, okay, you can sell them here, but we have to approve them. That's what we do with medical devices. That's what we do with airplanes. That's what we do with medication. Right. That's what we do with everything else. Either safety or in this case, security measures. You approve them. Okay, you can come. That was not the point.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's gonna blow up on the U.S. market's faces. Again, you're gonna have fewer choices. It's gonna be a monoculture. If there's ever a vulnerability in that one vendor, now everyone can get on at the same time. So yeah, and if you have less competition, and you're producing the devices away from the manufacturing supply chains that have the lower cost, which are typically in Asia these days, you're going to pay more for the same thing. So
yeah,
it is what it is.
So Netgear, it was announced a couple days ago, got an exemption for the routers that they're selling in the US. There were no details about why they got that exemption or what they had to do to get it. I could make some guesses. They would be highly political. So just use your imagination. But so it says that exemption is time bound to October 1st, 2027. Sounds like a subscription model, maybe. I'm not. But again, use your imagination, to fill in the gaps of what I mean by that. And part of the exemption, they have to submit a justification for the use of foreign manufacturing and a detailed time-bound plan to establish or expand manufacturing in the United States. So again, they're not saying move all production to the United States, just some production. It says establish or expand. So I mean, we just don't. So TSMC is up and running in Arizona now, and there are Apple chips coming out of it that are going into devices sold in the US. So we are slowly seeing some manufacturing happen here. Intel has always had manufacturing here. At no point have they ever not had manufacturing, but tariffs still affect their products because they manufacture the wafers, the silicon wafers here, and then they send them to Malaysia to get put in a box. So the boxing still happens in another country because it's just, all of a sudden, like, you don't want to double the price of the processor because that's what it costs to put it in a box here in the US. So financially, Netgear are consumer routers. I imagine there's a very small profit margin here. I
Yes.
imagine it, Netgear would probably sell a lot less stuff if they had to double or triple the price of their routers. So
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just a lot of room here to like inevitably like not do anything, and by then there'll be a different administration, and all this just kind of goes poof, just like the TikTok thing got kicked down the road until it no
Yeah.
longer mattered to anybody, and they just did something to appease it. Yeah, sure, like sell, we're going to run part of it from the US or whatever, however they
From an enforcement perspective, the thing that caught my attention in the article was a statement from someone from the FCC saying that if they would be a router, it has to be designed in the US and produced in the US to be able to be sold in the US. How do you ensure that it was designed in the US, though? How do you
and if
even
AI
enforce that?
designs it, does that count?
I don't know. Like, okay, so someone wherever else in the world designs it, sends you the designs, you sign off on it, you're a US citizen. Was it designed in the US? Like, you're setting up standards that are unenforceable, right? An
Yeah.
audit. How do you even audit that anyway? So it's just very clearly well thought through,
It would make
Jesus.
so much more sense, and we started to do this. There was labeling for consumer routers and cyber products, so we started down that road where we have security. We have companies actually doing the analysis of a Netgear router, looking for backdoors, looking for how easy it is to update the firmware. Is the firmware signed? Are you downloading the firmware over HTTP, something that can be intercepted, with a adversary in the middle attack. So we actually started down this road with a process to like who cares where it's built, right? Again, going back to like if this was about security, cybersecurity, and increasing the security of the products, which it's not. We've started down that road, and there are good ways of doing that, but it doesn't seem to be about the security of the devices. So yeah, maybe
It's
we should
interesting
spend any more time on this.
you mentioned that because we covered on the newsletter that the previous company that was about to do this was outsourcing a lot of the work they did to China, which kind of defeated the whole purpose of the program in
Oh,
the first
like
place.
the security assessment work.
Yes, the company was going to do the audits for that label. And then the Trump administration said, we can't, you're going to have to change this. And then it became inviable for them to do the work. So they dropped out of the program. That's why the program stopped. And there's a link on the newsletter. And remember, there's now a nonprofit that offered to take up that role. So there's a chance this program might be restarted. But now it would only apply to routers
Mm-hmm.
designed and manufactured in the US, because that's the routers they're in scope for even being tested. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah. It was. I interviewed a company that did that. It was called IOXT. I interviewed Grace Burkhardt there, and they were one of the companies doing that, or they were hosting the actual labels. I forget exactly what they were doing, but yeah, interviewed her back in early 2023, about 3 years ago. All right, in our final story here, this one is I don't know. It sounds kind of like it's tongue in cheek, but it's kind of not. But the way I titled this one, it was, "Is my third party a military target?" And is that on your risk register? Because apparently it's now a thing that some of us have to worry about. So we saw two regions were impacted by the war in Iran. I think there were three data centers in two regions, Bahrain and United Arab Emirates, and the one in Bahrain I think is just marked indefinitely down. It was damaged enough. I don't know if it was hit a second time, but I just can't imagine, like, there's people running around trying to get an AWS AZ back up, and wondering if another missile is going to come in while they're doing it. But less dramatic Well, less dramatic from a physical kinetic attack perspective. There was Stryker, right? And this Iran backed or Iran pro Iran group. I don't know where we are on the attribution there. Gets into Microsoft Intune and sends the wipe command to everything attached to Intune, which is kind of a nightmare scenario for a company that makes, sells, and manages medical devices, as well as other things. So,
Fun fact, a lot of Stryker employees had their personal devices because they had a
yeah.
BYOD policy be enrolled to Intune so that, okay, you can use your own phone, but you're going to need to have some oversight over it.
Oof.
Those were wiped as well. Not a fun
Oh, and
day
by
at
the
the
way,
office. Yeah.
any military ceasefire doesn't apply to cyber. And again, like this group, this pro Iran group, if they have that kind of uh, stature where they can say, oh, this is not our military, this is a independent pro Iran group, like they don't have to follow any kind of peace deals, any kind of ceasefire. Like none of that applies to the cyberspace because it's just attribution is so nebulous.
Yeah, man. So I think there's a couple of things here. As you said, you need to take geopolitics into play. So, for example, if you are a vendor in Europe, you need to think about if you're a first party in Europe, you need to think about your US-based vendors and the Cloud Act and how that impacts, especially again, if you have any um, information that is of intelligence or, country competitive economic value,
Yeah.
right? You should take that into account. But now there's also that, like you need to think about whether your vendors can be exposed to kinetic warfare, right? Which is not something I had on the cards for 2026. And the way I reason about this is it seems like a conflict between availability of services and data residency. I'm not sure because I don't know Middle Eastern legislation at all. I wouldn't want to say that I know it well, but let's assume that some of those countries said, I want my data in region. But typically, the reason why AWS will have a data center in a region, it's two reasons. It's because of latency issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then again, if you're in the Middle East, you probably could use, data centers in Europe, right? The reason why you would prefer to run a data center in region would be the same kind of controls over sovereignty, and the data is in country, and there's no way someone can, block my access to that data. Like if I'm using an AWS data center in Germany, maybe Germany can say, no, I'm going to go there and send the police or send whoever it is to seize your servers. But then if you are on a region that is exposed to military conflicts rather frequently, is that the best option? Like there's a
Well,
downside to requiring things from being in region, right?
well, and there's a third region as well. I think that you see it, and it's sales, marketing, and politics as well. Like in the Middle East, deals are very much done with handshakes um, and in person. And I think Japan is very similar. I think it would be very difficult to have a region in a different country and close deals in that country without a region there. So I think that's yet another reason you need a region in the country that you're doing business.
Yeah, but again, if you're regulating this, it's one more thing to keep in mind because if you are subject to data residency requirements, right, you
Mm-hmm.
cannot do multi-region. Like let's say I'm a vendor and I want to have my data be in multiple regions of AWS. Like I have the data being replicated between Europe and the Middle East. If there's legislation saying it can only be in the Middle East, and the Middle East is at war, you've created
Yeah,
yourself a problem where you're blocking
yeah,
the regulation is preventing you from having the distribution of data you would need to get proper security, because as you said, multiple regions there were affected, and each
yeah,
region has multiple data centers, but still. And this is not easy to recover from, because if there's people that entered that data center and equipment that entered the data center, AWS has to now restore it to a clean state, because there's a lot of guarantees that AWS gives its customers that nothing goes into that data center. Like everything that is in there was assessed and has been accounted for. And now a ton of firefighters and emergency responders went in there. They have to take everything else and put it back on, back new, known good stuff in now to make sure. Yeah, so it's a problem. It's a problem. Yeah, so maybe security budget for AWS now has to include missile interceptors, not just WAFs and firewalls. I mean, we laugh, but it's serious. Depending on the region of the world you are, I mean, you have to have armed guards around data centers and fences, right? I don't know, man. Depending where you are in the world, it might get to that.
New AWS product, Silicon Dome.
Right? I mean, come on. And seriously now, you in the before times, being a US company gave you some sort of protection, I guess, because people said it was a deterrent to certain groups, certain countries saying, this company has like the protection of the United States, depending on what you do, like you could get a government response because of it. If you're already in open conflict with everyone, there's no risk of you attacking a company, creating more escalation, because you're already at the top of the escalation list, essentially, right? So Iran specifically said any offices or any infrastructure of any U.S. technology company in the region is a valid target for me. So we hope the ceasefire holds, because this is hell for those companies, for their employees. I pray no one was hurt on those attacks, and their customers, right? But it's a new reality we have to take into account, including when picking which companies to do business with.
And even with the kinetic ceasefire, you still have to worry about all the cyber, the cyber realm stuff that they could just pivot to instead. Yeah.
And on the TPRM side, I think, again, I think most security assessments weigh a lot less on availability than I think they should, because of the value it brings to the business. But this is an example where a cyber aspect brings down availability. It's not about having redundancies, having anything. It's about, there's this very powerful action of, I'm going to wipe a device. And who knows, maybe how many people have that capability at your third party? Does the third party even know, let alone you, the TPRM analyst, right? So all of those centralized management infrastructure, your patch management tool, your endpoint security tool, your MDM, your AD, there's a lot of places where people could execute commands by design en masse on all of those on all of the third parties' infrastructure that is ripe for abuse. So again, one of the things you probably should add to your list of things to ask your third parties about, or to assess about them, is how well protected are those dangerous capabilities. We reviewed here at Tenchi, we published a blog post about, like CISA published a very broad, high-level guide on how to harden Intune and similar tools. We went a little bit deeper, published our own blog post saying in Intune, like, these are the configurations you should set. And we started an internal review process, because we do check Intune configurations to make sure people are minimizing the amount of users that have access to the dangerous things. They're requiring 2FA, they're requiring multi-steps approval for some of those things. And not only Intune, but all of the centralized management, like endpoint security tools that we scan, we're going back and reviewing, can we add stuff based on this? Because this was not on anyone's radar, or very few people's radars, to be looking out for this.
Yeah, and I think it kind of should have. We've seen breaches in the past. This is one of the reasons we need breach details, where the security tools were, or software management tools were targeted by attackers, because it was the best way to get their malware across. Like when you look back at Target, none of the write-ups mention it, but the fact that they got their POS malware across, in some cases, hundreds of terminals per store across thousands of stores. I don't think you do that without using a software management mechanism to do that, without using some kind of MDM or software deployment tool. So absolutely, if somebody wants to deploy the ransomware at scale, they're going to go after these management systems. These are going to be targets because it's the easiest way to get it done.
And then you say, oh, restricted to just a few people that use YubiKeys. But what about service desk reps that need to help people reinstall software?
Yeah.
So it's a hard problem.
It's a hard problem. All right, that's all we've got time for this month for this episode. Some very interesting stuff to cover. Definitely stuff that was not on my bingo card at the beginning of 2026. But that seems to be a theme for this year. So we'll see what we're talking about next month. Alex, thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a pleasure as usual. Thank you.
All right. If you liked what you heard and you're on a platform where you can like, subscribe, or leave a comment, please do so. We love getting feedback. Stay safe and stay vigilant, and we'll see you again next month.